So I'll set this up by saying many biblical skeptics go to Leviticus 25, 44 through 46 to support their charge of chattel slavery in the Bible. However, the Hebrew makes the case in verses 45 through 47 that the Toshavs, the sojourners, could not only wax rich, but these same Toshavs were co-business partners with Israel in hiring Aved servants. Would that immediately dispel the charge of chattel slavery in Leviticus 25 to you?
Now, Josh, do you know what Praise is talking about here exactly? Because when I listened to this at first, I mean, I understand what Praise is asking. I guess it's like, hey, does this particular aspect disprove the idea that Leviticus 25, 44 through 46 could be talking about chattel slavery? And I don't know what the thing he's talking about is. Exactly.
Is it possible to put Leviticus 25, 44 to like 47 up on the screen? And it can be in English, like English.
Yeah, I can get that for you. Just 1 second.
So this is an argument that it comes up frequently, but only online. You don't really see this, and I don't know that I've ever seen this in academic circles. And there's a reason why, and it's because fundamentally it just the syntax of the text it's not what it says. So I'll explain it hopefully, and if it's not clear by the end, John, just make me explain it more.
Okay. Did you need 47, or is just 46 all you need, or did you?
Can you put 47 up as well?
Yes,
is that possible? Sorry.
1 second.
Okay. So what's going on here? And you'll notice there's a break the heading that they put in the text, right? Obviously that's not there in the Hebrew, but there's a reason that whatever translation this is has that in there.
ESV. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, it's fine. It won't matter. So in Leviticus 25, particularly in this section, starting down in like 35 in particular, it starts to go this way. The text is dealing with how should Israelites engage with other Israelites becoming poor and destitute. So the chapter has a huge thing about the year of Jubilee and the setting all the people back to their property and canceling all debts. It's trying to look out for, at least it seems like on the surface, it is trying to look out for and provide for the Israelites, right, to make sure that they don't get oppressed. Now, just as an aside, Bruce Wells has written an article recently about anti-cretic pledges that seems to suggest that maybe this was sort of an underhanded, sneaky way of making things better for the creditor, but it doesn't matter. But that's what's going on here. So there are like phases that the Israelites can fall into greater and greater poverty. And so they can they sell some of their land. They end up running out of money and have to take loans. And then finally they run out of land and money, and now they have to sell themselves as slaves. So what are the other Israelites supposed to do with fellow Israelites? Well, at every step, they're supposed to treat them well, right? They're supposed to, in fact, in starting in verse 39, it says, essentially if an Israelite becomes so poor that he has to sell himself, you don't treat him as a slave. You're not allowed to treat him as a slave anymore, which is different if anybody is, out there watching. Exodus 21, Deuteronomy 15, these are earlier texts. They explicitly tell you how, what the rules are for keeping an Israelite as an Eved, the Hebrew word for slave. But here in Leviticus 25, it says no. Okay, so then the question arises in the text, well, if you're going to get slaves, where do you get them from? This is where 44 to 46 comes in, so I'll just read it real quick. As for your male and female slaves whom you may have, you may buy male and female slaves from among the nations that are around you. Now in the Hebrew here, the word is the goyim. If anybody's like a goy, like a Gentile, these are the nations that are around Israel. Then verse 45, you may also buy from among the strangers who sojourn with you. So the word that's used in here is, and it's the word that Praise said, it's toshav. Now, it comes from the Hebrew root yashav, which means to sit or to dwell. So a toshav is sort of like somebody that dwells, right? Somebody that's residing. Now, there's some debate about specifically what a toshav is. Meshar wrote an article, I think in maybe 2014, I don't remember. For the sake of argument, this is a foreigner, probably. Meshar argues that it could also be an Israelite, but it doesn't matter. Or it doesn't have to necessarily be a foreigner, if I'm remembering his article correctly. But most likely here, a foreigner who is, and I would say almost certainly a foreigner that's dwelling in the land. And this is a tenant farmer, right? This is somebody that is not able to own land themselves, right? If you think about the land of Israel is divided up and the tribes get their portions. And so, foreigners, the Hebrew word ger or nochri or toshav or any of these, foreigners, they can't own land, right? In Israel because it's already been apportioned to God's people. So what they can do is they can come in and rent a field from you. So John, let's say you're an Israelite, you own 10 acres of land. I come in, I'm a foreigner, and I say, hey, I'd like to rent out an acre of land to sow and to, cultivate. And with the anticipation that I'm going to yield a substantial crop and I'll be able to pay you the rent from a portion of it and then make money from the rest, right? So I'm renting out an acre from you. So if I do that, a person that is doing that is called a toshav, right? It's the argument. I think it's pretty compelling. But it's somebody that's residing in the land that doesn't own the land. Okay. So when it says here, you may also buy from among the strangers who sojourn with you, it's talking about these toshavim, these toshavs, these tenant farmers that are living in the land. What happens if I default on my loan to you? Well, if I'm an Israelite and I default on my loan, John, you're not allowed as a fellow Israelite to treat me as an eved. You're not allowed to treat me as a slave. So then it says here, as for your male and female slaves whom you may have, you may buy male and female slaves from among the nations that are around you, and you may buy them from among the strangers that sojourn with you. So me, the foreigner, the toshav, you can take me as a slave, right? And they may be your property. Now, the question is here, what happens is down in verse 47, if a stranger or sojourner with you becomes rich, that's also the word toshav. The word toshav is used there. And what happens is people look at verse 45, they see the word toshav, and then they look down at verse 47 and they see the word toshav and they say, aha, the toshav in 45 is a slave. That means the toshav in 47 is a slave. Now let's just stop there for a second. When I come into Israel and I rent out, or I rent out a field from you, an acre from you, am I a slave, John?
Technically, no. I don't think so.
I'm renting land from you. In fact, I may be independently wealthy. In fact, I think many of them were. I could have an awful lot of money. I just can't own land here, so I'm going to have to rent it out from you. I mean, shit, I might say to you, I'm going to rent all your land, right? I mean, that wouldn't work, but I rent out a field. When do I become a slave? I am a toshav when I rent out that field and work it. That's who a toshav is. When do I become a slave? Well, when I default on my loan. But John, what if I don't default on my loan? What if actually I make a shit ton of money? What if I have this amazing bumper crop or whatever? I mean, I'm not an agricultural guy, so sorry, I don't even, bumper crop might not be the right word there. But what if I make a whole bunch of, get a whole bunch of produce, make a whole bunch of money, and now, I mean, I'm just killing it out here. Mm-hmm. Am I a slave? No, I'm just this tenant farmer. And I'm doing really, really well. Now, if I don't do really well, John, you're allowed, if I default on my loan, you're allowed to take me as a slave. And you don't have to release me at the Jubilee. That's all that text is saying.
Okay.
In verse 47, it says, but if Josh, the toshav, the guy that, came and rented out the field, let's say I don't do what happens in verse 45. I don't actually default on my loan and have to be, sell myself to you and become a permanent slave, a chattel slave. Let's say that doesn't happen. Let's say actually I do really well. And look what I can do. If he becomes rich and your brother, an Israelite, so, let's say you got a brother named Jim or a friend that's an Israelite named Jim, and Jim becomes poor, and I give him a loan because that's how wealthy I am. I give him a loan, and he, an Israelite, defaults on the loan to me, right? He defaults on the loan that I gave him, and I take him as a slave. See, what the text is doing, I probably should have just drawn this, but what the text is doing is the text is dealing essentially with if an Israelite, loses money, if an Israelite or loses land, if he loses all his money, and if he loses all his money and his land, and has to sell himself as a slave, then in verse 47, what happens if he has to sell himself as a slave to a foreigner? That's what the text is doing here. So the point is that just because the same Hebrew word is used in 45 and 47, it would be like saying, man, I feel like I'm not being clear. Maybe in the audience, people could tell me if I'm being clear. John, do you think I'm being clear?
I mean, I think you're being clear. I mean, I followed you pretty well. That and maybe I can steel man it for you to see if I'm correct. So basically, Israelites are allowed to buy chattel slaves from the nations around them, but also if a sojourner in the land, like a foreigner in the land, is like defaults on the loan or whatnot, that person can become a slave to the person that they own money to. But conversely, if they don't default on the loan, then I guess an Israelite can sell themselves into debt slavery to the foreigner.
Yeah, that's right. So option one, like scenario one, that was perfect. So like scenario one, if I'm Josh, the Edomite, right, or whatever, or the Moabite, or here I am a foreigner. It doesn't matter. I'm a foreigner, and I come into the land, and I rent out a field from you. Option one is what happens in 44 to 46. I take out that loan, rent out the field from you, and I can't pay it back, and I become a slave, a chattel slave to you. That's option one.
Right.
However, in alternative universe, right, I come into the land, Josh the foreigner, I rent out a field from you, and I actually kill it. I do really, really well. And I do so well that I'm able to give out loans to other Israelites who then default to me and become slaves to me. The law is saying, well, we know what the law says if an Israelite defaults to another Israelite. They can't treat him as a slave. They have to release him in the Jubilee. They work as a hired worker. But what happens if an Israelite has to sell himself to a foreigner? Mm-hmm. What is the law then? And that's what 47 and following is dealing with. So again, the misconception here is that toshav doesn't mean slave, right? Toshav can become a slave, mm-hmm. but a toshav doesn't mean slave. It just means somebody is renting out a field from you. So a toshav can do really poorly and become a slave, or he could do really well and not become a slave. I mean, that's all this text is doing.
Right. So rereading what Praise is asking Paul Copan here, it kind of seems like Praise is asking him, hey, does this mean that the Toshav are really co-business partners, as like to mean they're only debt slaves in a sense? And that totally refutes the idea that this is discussing any kind of chattel slavery.
Yeah, maybe I should steel man their argument. What they're arguing is that, well, look, the Toshav here becomes a slave in 45. But then in verse 47, he's making a ton of money. How can a slave make a ton of money? Well, it must not be slavery. This must be some sort of business partnership, right? You can't have a slave making a shit ton of money. That's not slavery. It must be something else. And what they're doing is they're saying, in verse 45, where it says Toshav, that must be the same person in the same circumstance as a now slave in 47. And that is not what it's doing. 45 is saying there are Toshavs that do very poorly and have to sell themselves as slaves. There are also Toshavs that do really well and can loan out money. That's what the text is talking about. It just because the word toshav there is used does not mean that they're always a slave, because they're not.
Right. I think I know why this didn't make a lot of sense to me, because I feel like that's a very strained interpretation of the passage. Because I mean, even without knowing like the Hebrew behind it and everything like that, it's very obviously saying that you can buy from the strangers among you. Not that the strangers are slaves already.
That's right.
Just that they can become slaves.
That's right.
Is what it said. Like grammatically, that's just what it says in verse 45.
Switch it up, right? Let's say something. Say Israelites. Let's say this is supposed to. I mean, this will make it make sense, right? You may also buy, verse 45, from among the Israelites, right, and their clans, and they become your property, right? Verse 47, if an Israelite becomes rich, it doesn't mean that the same Israelite in 45 is now the Israelite in 47. It's not the same person. It's not Frank. Frank isn't there in 45 and now he's down in 47 as the slave. That's not how it works. It's saying there's like 100,000, let's say, just whatever. Or let's say there's 1,000. I don't know. I'm trying to think of a more realistic number. So there's 5,000 Toshavs that live in Israel. I know we're dealing with this a lot, but it's just such a big, stupid thing that comes up online. Sorry, I shouldn't have said stupid, but a thing that is incorrect that comes up online.
I don't know, it kind of seems stupid to me.
Let's say there are 5,000 of these Toshavs that are in the land and they're renting out fields. Some of them are going to do very poorly. And what happens if they do poorly and they default on the loans to the Israelites that have made the loans to them, to their creditors? They default to them. Well, they can become slaves of those Israelites. But what about these other ones that actually have really great, maybe they're in a slightly better part of the country that gets really great rainfall or whatever, and they actually have great crops and they very savvy businessmen, whatever, and they do really, really well. And they triple their profits, whatever. I'm not an economist, but now they are able to give out, they're really wealthy. These people have become slaves. These people have become wealthy. And now they're buying Israelites as slaves. What happens to those Israelites that are being bought as slaves? That's what the text is doing.
Okay.
Sorry if I over-explained or under-explained that.
No. I agree with you that's a very important aspect to get here, because it's very important to understand what's being asked, and two, what is the argument that it seems like Paul Copan is going to be I guess affirming, is what it seems like.
And if people in the audience need clarification, I feel like I just explained that terribly. Please ask. Or maybe don't, because you're like, I don't want to hear Josh talk about that anymore.
Let's see what Paul Copan has to say about Praise's, I guess, argument against Leviticus 25:44 through 47.
Sure. I mean, what's interesting about all of this is that the same sort of language that's used for, say, acquiring these foreign servants is also the same word that's used for acquiring an Israelite servant. Presumably, that's the Israelite is not a piece of furniture or something, and so we have really, it's more like contractual language that is taking place here. And we talk about, in sports, we talk about trading players and acquiring players and having team owners and so forth. You do have, for example, Eve talking about having acquired a man-child with the help of the Lord.
I feel like that's a very scholarly facepalm there, Josh.
Sorry, I just get so tired of hearing it. If anybody wants to hear the greatest reaction, I think John Collins up at Yale gave the best reaction to that, because I asked him the question, I don't even remember where, and he essentially said, "Nice try." Nice try. Yeah. So like, I don't know if I need to go into this sports contractual stuff. A sports contract pays the person millions of dollars. They can leave whenever they want. They're not slaves. I mean, this is why I learned about Venn diagrams just because of this. And I think they're Venn diagrams, the two circles that go together and
Yes.
overlap. Okay. So there are words in English and in every goddamn language that have semantic overlap, right? Like the word run, as it applies to like a deer running across the field, and the word run as it applies to the engine in your car, right? There is some overlap in a Venn diagram, but you can't then say that they mean the same thing. right? They have this exact same nuance all the time. Like, that's not how this works. So when you define terms, like, sorry, go ahead.
So, sorry, I was just going to say, I think that what you're trying to say is that there's an equivocation fallacy going on here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like when committees get together and they say, hey, all right, how should we be translating eved, right? The Hebrew word that is translated slave. What drives the meaning? Well, you don't like say, well, over here in this other verse in Isaiah 53, it means, it's used to talk about like the suffering servant. Well, that's like Jesus. And so Jesus is King of Kings. So then Eved means king. Like, no, right? That's not how that works. And not that I think anybody's actually making that. I don't think Paul would make that argument. But the way that you define a term and figure out what it means is the fucking context. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say it like that, but that's what it is, the context. You don't say, well, I mean, shit, here, Cain is acquired of the Lord. Well, that must be what it says. He acquired a belt for silver, right? What? No, Eve didn't like give silver to Yahweh to get Cain. Like, I mean, Okay. No. So yes, you can't just say there's a one-to-one correspondence because a word means something here, it means something here. It's not how it works. So certainly, and I do this in the book, I go through this argument in Did the Old Testament Endure Slavery? And I show all the different places where the word kana, which is the Hebrew word that's used here, refers to, it's just it just means to buy something. You buy a pot, you buy a belt, you buy a slave. And what you do to figure out what these people are, what their social position is, what their activities are, is you look at the goddamn context. And when it talks about they become property, they are not released, they're passed down as inheritance, they serve for life. Like, okay.
Yeah, I don't know why Paul Copan just sort of looks past that, because, well, talking about how you can bequeath them as property and all this other stuff and everything. I just don't understand how he can sort of just jump over that part and act like, because I feel like he's acting with his comparison to like trading football players or whatnot.
Yes.
Is that he's acting like, he's already come to the conclusion that chattel slavery doesn't exist. So What is it talking about? It's talking about debt slaves. And so apparently you can trade debt slaves as like they're football players or something like that. Like, oh, that guy right there, he loves to take on debts and then not pay them. I'll trade him off for that guy that can do the same thing.
It's like I feel like it's like making an argument for how great the prison system is, because some homeless people during the winter in really cold areas of the country will commit like a minor crime or something. Something that gets them 6 months in jail, 5 months in jail, so that they can get out of the cold. Right. Or like how jail must be great because there are people that try to get in. Like, what? Okay. I don't even remember what his earlier point was. Because the word is used both for Israelites and yes, that's the point. The point of the text is that an Israelite, go back to Exodus 21, read what's going on there. An Israelite is destitute. What does he have left? He has himself. He sells himself. If you read, 2 Kings 4, you see a creditor coming to take the 2 children of the widow woman. It's not that they're like, woohoo, we get to go be slaves. No, come on. Like, Jesus. So yes, they're selling themselves or they're being purchased. Sometimes, like if you look at Newsy, for example, doesn't matter. There's a Mesopotamian city, Newsy, and people will come in and say, like, if I'm really, really poor and you're really, really wealthy, John, I might come to you and say, hey, I will be your slave for the rest of your life. And we'll sign this contract. I'll be your slave, sell myself to you, right? We'll sign this contract. We'll negotiate the terms and I become your slave, your literal slave. I can't leave. If I leave, there are hefty, hefty penalties that are put on me. People can go read about them if they want to. But the reason that I would do that is that at the end, when you die, that contract, it's a process of adopting me. You adopt me legally and I become your child. I get manumitted upon your death and I get a share in your inheritance. That's why I would do it, right? So those are things that can happen, but that's not what they're talking about here. These are people. It says it. The text is explicit. Like, oh.
Just so you know, Casey just offered to adopt you.
Listen, you don't want me as a kid. All this profanity I use, it's no good. It's no good. Sorry.
Have you seen my channel?
The
shirt that I have on right now says citation fucking needed. I felt like it was appropriate for the stream.
Mine says,
y'all need Jesus.
In Genesis 4, or in the book of Ruth, Boaz acquires Ruth as a wife in this legal transaction.
It's not the flex that he thinks it is, but go ahead.
It's definitely not the flex he thinks it is.
And also it's interesting too, and I point this out in the forthcoming book, that within a generation, at max 2, you would have these foreigners who are assimilated into the nations in which they live. So basically, it's not going to be an intergenerational sort of servitude, as James Hoffmeyer and others have pointed out. That this is something that actually, any bequeathing or passing them on from one generation to another, just basically doesn't take place. You have
this.
I'm sorry. Hold on. I've got to wait a second. This seems very contrary. I just need to double check something real fucking quick right here. Let me see if I can read this real quick. You may bequeath them to your sons after you inherit as a possession forever.
Yes.
So, Josh, apparently this just didn't happen, and they wrote it down for shits and giggles.
See, but this is what is so goddamn frustrating about this type of apologetic. Let's take a step away for a second from this, and let's go back to ancient Near Eastern law codes, right? People have, it's become cool among Christian apologists now to say, whoa, we know. Don't you know, you silly atheists? Don't you know that the ancient Near Eastern law codes? Do you even know what those are, bro? The ancient Near Eastern law codes, they weren't normative legislation. I mean, what a silly notion. These are propaganda pieces. It's not that these are the actual laws that were enforced. And so when you come to the biblical law collections, that it's not like Yahweh is actually saying, go do this stuff. This is where what you're doing is you have a foot in both camps. You have a foot in the fundamentalist evangelical interpretation of the text where you're like, Yahweh gave these commands to Moses, right? These are the commands that were given to Moses, to the nation of Israel after they left in the Exodus and Mount Sinai, bitches, right here, right? Then when that doesn't work, when it says really bad shit, you're like, wait. Scholars have determined, though, that this didn't actually happen. So you can't go using this, right? No, but Moses, Yahweh, but you can't go saying that these are actual laws. You can't have it both ways. You got to pick one, right? You can't have it both ways. So this idea here that, wait a minute, I mean, the text says this, but we know that this is late, right? This is a late exilic or post-exilic idea. In fact, we know this, like, duh, read Leviticus 25, read fucking Deuteronomy 15. This is utopian language. Right? God is supernaturally providing. Of course, it's utopian language, but that's a critical look at the text. And they don't do a critical look at the text unless it suits them. And then it's like, whoa, hyperbole, ancient Near Eastern war rhetoric. These aren't law codes. Like, miss me with that shit.
Yeah, here in a little bit, if we get to it, I'm not sure if we'll have time, but I know that at some point, Praise, I believe, said that the laws that are commanded by God, that are given by God, at least the uncomfortable ones, they are descriptive, not prescriptive. And somehow that means that, like, the bad shit just never happened.
And that's what this is, right? And again, like, I'm upset with the argument, right? Because I understand why people are doing it. I really do. It's one of these things that if you haven't been put through the rigor to actually have to think about these things from a lexicographic standpoint, or from a historical standpoint, if you haven't undergone that, you just may not know that, right? And so what I'm saying is that this is something that's they need to come up with something. They need to come up with something. And so this is one of the, wait a minute, if these aren't normative legislation, then maybe we can use that. Maybe that's not an actual law. That's not, you can't say that because it didn't happen in reality, that's not what the text means. It doesn't work that way, right? These are obviously Judean scribes, right? Writing this shit. Or the priestly, or whatever source that you're talking about when we're talking about the Pentateuch. These are writers that are writing in utopian language here, right? This is part of the Holiness Code. I'm very certain that Praise would not say the documentary hypothesis or any type of, well, I don't know, maybe he would. I don't want to speak for him, but I don't think that Copan is going to walk away from at least a significant core of the Pentateuch being Mosaic authorship. You can't do both. You can't do both. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I guess one thing that I'm left wondering is, do we actually have evidence that this was not practiced in Israel? It kind of felt like, because he's just sort of saying it as if, I'm the authority on this, and so I don't need source evidence or anything like that. You just got to believe me, bro. Is kind of the vibe that I get off of Copan right now. But I'm just kind of curious, if there is any kind of evidence that says, yeah, they didn't really do this. It was just sort of written down.
So I haven't done tons of research, and I'm not exactly sure where he's talking about, Hoffmeyer talking about this. He did a video panel a year ago, maybe. I don't remember. Dick Averbeck was in there. It's people from Trinity. And then I think Peter Williams was in there, who's up at Tyndale. Evangelicals, right? And they're talking about slavery. And I know that he talked about how in Egypt, historically speaking, probably talking about the New Kingdom, I don't remember, but that this was something that when Israelites, or not when Israelites, I don't remember exactly what he was talking about, when slaves, probably just Asiatic slaves or Semitic slaves, came into Egypt, that within a generation or two, they were assimilated into the people, right? Let me take a step back. So that's not Israel, right? If that's what he's referring to, he's not talking about Israel there. But let me take a step back. Who gives a fuck? Let's just assume for a second that that's true, that the guy's only a slave for his entire life. But by the next generation, or maybe the one after that, they're not slaves anymore. Is that what you want to do? Hey, check it out. Look what I came up with. No. Walk back. Jesus. Yeah.
All right. We got a couple more minutes in this section, so let's see if he has any.
Sorry.
He has bad takes all throughout it, and so let's see how much longer he can go before another bad take occurs.
Them assimilated within the nation and within a generation or max two. Finally, I would also add that the foreigner, we're told in Leviticus 19 that the Israelites are to love the alien or the foreigner in their midst. Do you think that, say 6 chapters later, all of a sudden you're saying, it's okay to abuse the foreigner in your midst? That's not it at all.
The biblical text talk a lot about loving your children. Do you think that in Proverbs it would then say to beat them with wooden rods? Come on. Do you think the text would actually say, if you love your child, you will beat them, and the father that doesn't love them, that hates him, will not beat him? That's abuse from our, this is they talk about this all the time, looking back with 21st century eyes and not understanding the context. That's what that is. They did not consider it abuse. God. This was part of what they did.
Yeah, that brings up as you were talking, I thought of trying to put it into the correct context. Would the Israelites consider buying a stranger that or sojourner in the land a foreigner in the land, buying them after they defaulted off of a loan or something like that, like would they see that as an unloving action, or would I don't think that maybe they would see it as maybe necessarily a good action. I could see them seeing it as like a neutral, like this is the law, yes. Like this is what happens, kind of thing.
I mean,
it's
what,
like,
I mean, gee, think about it. Look back to Exodus 21, right? Or look at Deuteronomy 15. They're able to take Israelites as eveds. This is the argument that they make, right? Isn't this the argument that they make all the time? Oh, man, look, it says if they love their master, then they can volunteer to stay with them forever. Isn't that their argument? That it's so good, that it's so great? Why isn't it so great now?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, and he actually brings that up later. The whole, the slaves opting or servants or something opting to become part of the master's household or something like that.
But just to sort of finalize that, like, if we're going to play this game, then we have to go to places like Deuteronomy 21 and say, well, they weren't forcing captive women to marry them. They weren't doing that because they're supposed to love the foreigner, right? So how could they, you couldn't force somebody. Why not say that? I mean, Mike Winger's going to say, man, it was great. Yeah, it's a great, we should do it today, right? I don't know if he would say that. I don't know if that's fair, but yeah, anyway.
Paul Copan does make an argument for Numbers 31 here. That's one that I definitely want to get to.
Yeah, we can skip if you think there are better arguments or things that you
well, I don't know. I mean, he's saying a lot of dumb shit here, so I'm good with continuing with this section for right now.
You have a requirement. In fact, we see mentioned 36 times in the Pentateuch, to love the stranger, the alien, the widow, because you too were once aliens in the land of Egypt. Yes. There's that reminder over and over again. So if you just think about it, if the Israelites had been oppressed in the land of Egypt, are they then going to go, therefore, say, oh, we've got permission to oppress foreigners? I mean, it's just ludicrous as you think about it.
No, what's ludicrous is that you're equivocating on the meaning of the word oppress, like that you're saying that they would have thought that taking someone as a chattel slave was oppression. You can't do that. Look, somebody like Gerstenberger has in the Old Testament, I think it's in the Old Testament library. I can't remember. He's got a commentary on the book of Leviticus, and he wrestles with this, right? I think Gerstenberger's an evangelical, but he wrestles with this in the text, right? He says, how is it that Leviticus 19:33 to 34 could say, love the foreigner, but then here in Leviticus 25:44 to 46 says you can keep him for life? But it does. And to me, it's frustrating that we would say today that beating your child with a wooden rod as a form of discipline is oppression. I mean, I hope that we would say that.
Well, as long as you're not Michael Pearl.
Should I know who that is? Sorry.
Oh, no, so sorry. That's the guy, along with his wife, that wrote the book To Train Up a Child.
Oh my God, yes.
He teaches how you can beat your child into submission and not cause any kind of like alarms at school and everything like that, and have CPS called on you and stuff.
Jeez.
It's basically how to abuse your kids kind of.
God.
Anyways, I'm sorry for interrupting you.
No. I think I probably made my point too.
Well, I mean, to play off of that, I mean, it was not considered bad or abusive not too long ago for school administrators to beat kids with paddles.
I got beat.
I mean, I was in a school where a kid bit me on the arm, and I saw him later on in the day getting the shit beat out of him by the principal.
Yep.
So, I mean, it was not too long ago, which, I mean, I'm an old fuck, but it was not too long ago that, that kids were being beaten in schools. And there are people now that want to sign a waiver that would allow teachers to beat kids in school. Yeah. So, I mean, I think the whole, whipping your kids with, hard instruments and everything like that, I think that, that now some people wouldn't consider as abusive. So, I mean, yeah. Totally.